Here's something nobody seems to notice. We spend enormous amounts of time analyzing millennials. We've written entire books about boomers. Gen Z gets documentary series, think pieces, endless Twitter threads, but there's this one generation sitting quietly in the corner of every conversation, watching all of it unfold and saying absolutely nothing. Generation X, born roughly between 1965 and 1980, the forgotten middle child of modern history. And here's the part that actually matters. Their silence isn't an accident, it's a survival strategy, one they built from scratch, starting in childhood, long before they had words for what they were doing. To understand Gen X psychology, you have to go back to where it started. Not in schools or in culture, in empty houses. Picture a Tuesday afternoon in 1977. A 10-year-old comes home from school, fishes a key out of their backpack, and unlocks the front door. No parent waiting inside, no note on the counter, just the hum of a refrigerator and 4 hours until anyone else shows up. This was the era of the latchkey kid, and it wasn't a rare exception. It was the defining childhood experience of an entire generation. By the mid-1980s, researchers estimated that somewhere between 7 and 12 million American children were regularly coming home to empty houses after school. That's not a statistic. That's a generation learning its first and most permanent lesson. You are responsible for yourself. But the house wasn't just empty. It was quiet in a way that forced something to happen inside a child's mind. Without anyone to narrate the experience, to explain why a noise was scary or a shadow was nothing, children had to build their own frameworks for reality. Psychologists call this autonomous meaning-making, the process of constructing your own interpretation of the world without external scaffolding. Gen X did this every single afternoon for years. It's why, as adults, they tend to distrust received wisdom. They've been constructing their own version of things since they were 10, and when the parents did come home, there wasn't much decompression time. The 1970s and 1980s were not known for gentle parenting. Feelings weren't processed. Conversations weren't had. If you crossed a line, you knew it immediately and physically. If you did well, maybe you got a nod. The emotional transaction was efficient and non-negotiable. What that produces, neurologically, is a nervous system that's calibrated for efficiency. Gen X doesn't need a lot of external validation because they never received much. Research in developmental psychology suggests that children who grow up in low validation environments develop stronger internal locus of control, meaning they attribute outcomes to their own actions rather than luck or other people. That's adaptive. It's also exhausting in ways they rarely admit. Now layer on top of that what Gen X was watching in the broader world. They came of age during Watergate, during the Iran hostage crisis, during the AIDS epidemic, which the government spent years pretending wasn't happening while people died. They watched 3 Mile Island. They watched the Challenger explode on live television in school gymnasiums across the country. And through all of it, adults in positions of authority either lied, fumbled, or looked the other way. There's a specific psychological phenomenon researchers have identified called institutional distrust, where repeated exposure to institutions failing produces a generalized skepticism toward organized authority. Gen X didn't develop this from ideology, they developed it from observation. They watched it happen in real time, repeatedly, in different domains with different faces. The result is a generation that defaults to skepticism not as a posture, but as a cognitive habit. When someone with a title tells them something is fine, the first internal response is it though? But here's where it gets more complicated. Gen X is also one of the most competent generations in the workforce, quietly and without announcement. They learned to work young. Not internships, not passion projects, actual work, paper routes in the dark, grocery store shifts where you learned to make change in your head when the machine went down. babysitting entire households at 13 for cash. These jobs didn't come with feedback loops or mentors. You either figured it out or you lost the job. The skill that produced wasn't just technical, it was the ability to function under uncertainty without anyone holding your hand. That skill transferred directly into adult professional life. Gen X doesn't need to be managed. They find being managed slightly irritating. They don't want you to explain the goal and then check in every week. They want you to explain the goal and disappear. They will handle the rest, and they will do it without telling you how hard it was. But the independence has a shadow side that doesn't get talked about enough. Studies on adult attachment and coping behavior show that Gen X is significantly less likely than other generations to seek social support during periods of high stress. Not because they don't have people they could reach out to, but because asking for help activates something uncomfortable. There's a deeply embedded equation running in the background. Needing help equals failure. That equation was installed in childhood and it runs quietly, efficiently, and almost invisibly. They'll solve the problem, they'll handle the crisis, and they'll do it alone, at some cost to themselves, without mentioning it. This is connected to something else. Gen X has a complex relationship with emotions that gets misread as coldness. They're not cold, they're protected. There's a difference. Growing up during the Cold War did something specific to the psyche. Children were taught in school that nuclear annihilation was a genuine and present possibility. Duck and cover drills weren't metaphors. They were practice runs for the end of the world, presented alongside multiplication tables and reading comprehension. When a child absorbs that information inside an institutional setting designed to feel safe, the result is a particular kind of dissociation. You learn to hold catastrophe at arm's length. You learn that irony is protective. If you can laugh at the darkest thing in the room, you don't have to be destroyed by it. That ironic posture became one of Gen X's most recognizable cultural signatures. The detachment, the dry wit, the refusal to be earnest in public. What looks like apathy from the outside is actually armor that was forged under very specific conditions. And like all armor, it's useful. And like all armor, it has a weight the wearer stops noticing after a while. Then came the economic dimension. Gen X entered the job market and immediately got hit. The dot-com bubble wiped out early careers. The 2008 financial crisis arrived just as the oldest Gen Xers were approaching the financial stability their parents had promised would come if they worked hard and followed the rules. The rules changed. The stability didn't arrive. And Gen X, characteristically, adapted without complaining publicly about it. What that adaptation looks like in practice: multiple income streams, side work, freelance, the ability to pivot, not because Gen X is naturally entrepreneurial in the way the word is used now, but because they absorbed a lesson early and it stuck. No single source of income is safe. No company is loyal. The only thing you can actually control is your own competence and your own flexibility. Researchers studying Gen X financial behavior note higher rates of income diversification and lower rates of long-term institutional investment compared to boomers at the same age. They're not pessimistic about money. They're precise. They've done the math on what happens when you trust a single system entirely, and they're not interested in running that experiment again. And then there's the question of what Gen X is doing now. As parents, they raised their children with more presence than they were given, more attention, more engagement, more deliberate effort to be the parent they didn't have. And somewhere in that effort, a quiet anxiety appeared, because they look at their children and they see something that worries them. They see kids who don't know how to be alone, who need constant input, constant feedback, constant stimulation, and Gen X, who spent thousands of childhood hours alone with nothing but their own thoughts and a broken bicycle, quietly wonders what that absence of solitude is going to cost. That's the central paradox of Generation X psychology. They were failed by the systems around them in ways that were real and sometimes damaging. And in responding to those failures, they built a set of internal capacities that are genuinely remarkable. Adaptability, self-sufficiency, competence under pressure, the ability to function without external validation, without constant feedback, without a support structure designed around their comfort. They're not better than other generations. That framing misses the point entirely. They're shaped by a specific moment in history, a window between the old certainties and the new ones, where the old maps stopped working and the new ones hadn't been drawn yet. They had to navigate that gap on their own at a young age with whatever tools they could find. They became the bridge between analog and digital, between strict authority and collaborative culture, between emotional repression and emotional fluency. Bridges don't get monuments. They get used. They hold things together quietly, without ceremony, without anyone stopping to ask how the bridge is doing. And Gen X, characteristically, would tell you they prefer it that way. Whether that's actually true is a different question, but asking it in public was never really their style.